mics on mute so that we could, so the speakers, when they talk, they can have some peace. Sorry for that. As well, as a family enterprise grows into a big business, it takes a very formal structure, and good business practice makes it a sustainable business. So compliance, governance, the process of choosing your successor, or even your HR practices all start moving towards being professionalized, either by the family members themselves or with the help of outsiders. Today we have with us Haigreve Khaitan and Samir Shah, both from Khaitan and Company. Haigreve is one of India's finest and most sought after commercial lawyers. Being a third generation lawyer himself, he truly recognizes and cherishes how strong family values lay a solid foundation for very successful businesses. He has been and continues to remain involved in some of the largest and most comprehensive and complex family arrangement matters, and carries tremendous expertise in terms of being able to advise businesses on good practices. It is therefore no surprise that he sits on the board of marquee companies like Borosil, Shiat, Inox, PVR, Geo Platforms, JSW, Mahindra, Tech Mahindra, and Torrent. When not working, Haigreve can be found on the nearest golf course, working to improve his putting and driving skills. Samir is a corporate commercial lawyer and a partner of Khaitan and Company. Aside from his routine work involving agreements and transactions, he also has significant experience in advising business families around their succession planning and other similar arrangements. Aside from his work, Samir carries an active personal passion towards all things aviation and will also soon embark upon a journey to obtain a recreational pilot's license. Both Haigreve and Samir tell us that they are family men and both blessed with 2 daughters. So over to Haigreve. Do join us. And thank you for coming here.
Thank you very much, Pratima. It's really a great pleasure and honor to be here today and to have a chat around family businesses, which is very close to really my heart, because as you said, my own business started like a family business, and today it's a completely professionally owned and run business. So I've sort of lived that transformation myself. And apart from advising clients on family business and that transformation, I'm of course joined by my partner Samir, who I think is one of the finest family advisors today, family law advisors, and advising many families. I won't name them, but some of the disputes and differences which you see in the papers today, Samir has been advising. So with that, we'll start. Please feel free to interrupt and ask questions, or we can do the Q&A at the end. It's really informal as a discussion. So that's the way it is. We have some slides. We'll run through the slides, but feel free to interrupt. The topic we've really chosen is family business, sort of good practices. And when we talk about good practices, we're really talking about some of the emerging trends we are really seeing in family businesses. And these are some of the topics we've put together in terms of, values and constitution, succession planning, the governance, means of finance, and then growing beyond boundaries and borders, what family businesses are doing today. So I thought it'll be good to start with this cartoon, really to show how traditionally family business is perceived as going from generation to generation to generation. And the parents really never think that there is any reason to plan. They think that every generation and everybody should be part of the business. There'll never be any disputes. There'll never be any differences. Governance will be sorted out. And that's how traditionally family businesses have been run. But I don't think today we are in a stage where we can really run family businesses on that basis, given how the world has gone, growth and opportunities both. So I thought this really depicted very well what was happening in the past. The importance of medium and small side family businesses, I just thought we'll put some data. In a recent survey, family-owned businesses, 56% of the respondents were running family businesses under a sole ownership model. India has more than 108 publicly listed family-owned businesses and ranks third highest in the world for the progress and development of family-owned businesses. And this is excluding sort of listed companies which are family controlled. We are really talking about family-owned businesses. And in a recent sort of Credit Suisse research report, it was said that family businesses carried a average market capitalization of US $6.5 billion, which gives India 5th rank in the Asia Pacific. And it's no surprise that family businesses in India make up for 79% of India's GDP. So this is a very important aspect of corporate India and the business environment in India. We thought we'll just mention it. We can perhaps move to the next slide. So the first topic we thought we'll take up is talking about values and mission of a family, and related to that is having a family constitution. When we talk about values and mission, I think why do we really need to think about something like this? I guess it's about focus, it's about performance, and this is again something depicting where a family business has got into virtually everything, data analytics to software to knitting to supplies and even to live bake in this cartoon. So is that really focus? Is that a family business which can progress, or what are the chances? And in such a complex sort of business environment, do you really need to articulate the vision of a family business? So a family's values and process reflects in the operations of the business. So unless you actually document and put down what are the values of a business and why the family is setting out with that business, do you really able to get the entire potential out of it? And when you talk about family businesses, you're really talking about multiple family members in a business. And therefore, it becomes important to document the vision and mission statement of the business. What do we really mean by this? So really vision and mission statement, articulating duties of the board of directors, maybe trustees of the senior management, authority and responsibilities amongst the different family members, board and senior management. So at 3 levels, at the ownership level, at the board level, and at the management level. What powers and responsibilities will stay where? What will be the control system? How will decision making be done? Otherwise, as businesses grow and progress, it becomes a lot of confusion, and the ability to grow in an organized way is perhaps not there. Strategy for conflict resolution, again, can be documented with various family members. And then business direction. So maybe certain families don't want to be in certain businesses. For example, some families don't want to be in the weapons business. They don't want to be in alcohol, or they want to only stick to healthy, nutritious food, no junk food. So I think these are all important to document as a family business in order to avoid conflicts and disputes and differences going forward. And that really leads to a family constitution. And a family constitution is a document really like a contract agreed between the family members. Generally speaking, a family constitution is not intended to be legally binding, but it's like a guidance to the family. There are subsets of the family constitution where there's a shareholders agreement, maybe an employment agreement, non-compete agreement, which are all intended to be legally binding. So the overall family constitution usually would have rights, values, responsibilities, rules which apply as stakeholders. So you may be a shareholder, who can get employed, who cannot get employed, what remuneration will a person draw, how will expenses be booked, whether they'll be booked at a company level, whether they will be booked at a personal level, and what will be the level of expenses between different family members, how will non-competes work, what if somebody wants an exit, will an exit provision apply or not, will the person be able to actually get full value and disrupt the business. So these are all sorts of issues dealt with in a family constitution and a subset in a shareholders agreement. Most important, I think, in a family constitution will be it gives you the platform for open communication between family members, and that is very important to actually implement the common vision of the family, achieve the business purpose, and also avoid conflicts. And if there is a good family constitution, then one can actually communicate better and avoid conflicts. Of course, when we talk about family constitutions, it's very easy to overcomplicate it. And this again shows that, look, the more simple the family constitution is, the better it is. There are certain basic things which a family constitution must contain, but otherwise we can't have committees and committees and then a supervising committee, and then it's far too complicated to actually administer. I'll talk about one case study where there was no family constitution, and this is of course from public domain. This was the case of the Zandu business. Zandu Pharmaceuticals was producing traditional Indian medicines using Ayurvedic practices. It was established by the Vedyas in 1910, and then who really came from a lineage of Ayurvedic medical practitioners. They were joined by the Parekh family, and they did not, between the Parekhs and the Vedyas, there was really no family constitution. And the Parekhs were more commercial in their approach, whereas the Vedyas were probably more, let's say, on the technical and medicinal side. And ultimately, what it led to was Vedyas didn't have a role left in the business. And ultimately, the Vedyas sold their stake to Imami. And that was perceived at that time as a very hostile move by the Parekhs. But what it led to was ultimately also Parekh selling out, and the entire business got sold out. So the lesson learned really was that, look, had there been a good understanding, communication between the Parekhs and the Vedyas, perhaps the family could have continued with this business, or even if they had a joint and agreed strategy to exit, rather than have acrimony between the two sides of, let's say, the family, who really operated like a family between them. So this was one learning really, which I thought one could share. As we move along, another, we can maybe move to the next slide.
Prakash, can we move to the next slide?
I think the slide is stuck or something. Yeah. So this is again another cartoon showing, misalignment in a family. So look at this slide where it says we are all together watching television, but we are not all watching television together. So that really is a classic case of a family where they are all in the same business, but they are not doing business together. So they all have conflicting interests. They are doing things on their own, but they are very much part of the same business. So this is really where a family constitution, putting your vision, mission, rules, governance, all of it together can really help in a family business. And then I have one more case. Let's talk about a very successful case, which is the GMR family, again in the public domain, where this Hyderabad-based family was a very early mover to put together a family constitution. As you'll see, the family constitution is really described in the public domain as a gold standard, because it's really drafted from what is available in public domain very well. And the founder, Mr. G.M. Rao himself put it in place, with a view to keeping the family together. And he was very wary of the family businesses which went into bankruptcy, and wanted to ensure that there is uniformity of thought between different family members. And the family constitution, as we know from public sources, is provided in great detail, including code of conduct, restrictions, and very important, something which will uphold the reputation of the business. So having a good constitution can reduce chance of family conflicts and bring about uniformity within the family business. So with that, we go to, maybe the second part is really on succession planning. Maybe Samir, you want to?
Sure. Absolutely. So again, thank you, Haigreve, and once again, thank you to Pratima, you and the entire team at CII for helping us put this together. And clearly, succession planning becomes a very key aspect of this entire exercise. On several occasions, clients actually come to us first wanting to talk about this, and then we have to tell them that, look, you have to approach this in a more structured manner. And consistent with the format we've used today, if we flip to the next slide, what we'll try and do is just sort of talk about several times we say we shouldn't get caught in a race, and life is actually a lot more than a race. But what we have on the next slide is a key example of how, yes, maybe it's a race, but it's at the end of the day a team effort. And if the team doesn't function in a coherent and a coordinated manner, it's more likely than not that this will not move forward in the same direction. So take the example of a relay race, and there is a baton that needs to be passed on from generation to generation. Now the question is, firstly, what is that baton? A large part of what we do in succession planning is to work with the businesses, understand from them what the realities of that business are and what are their objectives. Is it always meant to be profit? Is it meant to be beyond profit? Increasingly, we hear and see so much about CSR and ESG as larger goals for businesses, for them to be able to give back. Increasingly, we also need to study each of the three participants in that team, and each of those people as individuals and personalities. And several times what tends to happen is that there are far too many technicalities on how the baton needs to be passed on. So once it becomes a company, then you get into restructuring. Once it becomes an LLP, you get into all other sorts of things if it's a trust. But what people forget is, at the end of the day, whatever that whole is, it has to be passed on from person to person to person. So several times, it's very easy to try and apply good practices or best practices that may have worked for another set of circumstances. But one really needs to see whether they will work for the next set of circumstances. in that context, we always view succession planning from two perspectives. The first is, which we believe is more important, is management succession. Because at the end of the day, what are we trying to say? It's not a mere asset, it's not a mere house which is being passed on from father to son or from mother to daughter. It is rather a question of a business. It's a question of a business which is running today, will be running tomorrow, and needs to run in perpetuity, because there's obviously a whole host of stakeholders it serves. If there's an ecosystem it feeds. And therefore, before you start with ownership, which is obviously the next element, the first aspect is management. For management, you need to appreciate and understand who are the successors of that business. There's obviously the concept of primogeniture. There's obviously the concept of family sticks together. But then the question we need to ask ourselves very objectively, and this sometimes becomes a difficult question, is that are the next generation of family members, A, do they have the wherewithal? B, do they have the inclination? And C, do they have the necessary combination of both skill sets and inclination to take business forward, maybe in the same way as it has done in the past, or maybe even to greater heights? Once that has happened, those individuals who we'd like to call active family members in the context of the business, they have to be identified and they have to be groomed. What does grooming involve? Grooming involves educating them about the realities of the business. Grooming involves talking to them and keeping them engaged at all levels of the business, not just with the senior management, but also with, say, the lower level employees, say with the customers, say with the suppliers, say with the larger perception that that business holds. All of this grooming, of course, you can supplement that with education, you can supplement that with tutelage and training. But this experience which comes from the earlier generation is what we believe forms a very important part of management succession. And which is why, whether it is a mission statement, whether it is the family constitution, it needs to promote a culture of meritocracy. And it needs to promote a culture of putting the interests of the larger business before the interests of the individual who you're trying to hold that on. Once you're clear on who those active members are, and you're clear on what sort of grooming they've been given, you will be able to appreciate whether or not certain aspects of the family or certain members of the family are able to participate in management. What you will see if you compare India to say the Western peers, in several parts of the world, businesses that are now completely professionally run, but family owned, at some point of time in the past started off as family owned and family run businesses. But over generations, over decades, those owners have realized that perhaps there are other managers who are better suited to run those businesses and in fact multiply the wealth of those same owners. So that's really the first aspect of succession planning, which is management succession. Now coming to the more talked about portion and the slightly more technical portion, which is, say, ownership succession. And in large part, it's a little difficult to plan for this all put together in one go. You obviously need to think as far ahead as you can, but you also need to put in place some sort of a nimble structure which can react to changes, which can react to the realities of life. So to begin with, the first and the most important aspect is, do we have clarity on how will a smooth transfer of all of these assets or ownership happen from generation to generation? Now, in large part, as families grow and as the same assets need to be transferred, this becomes more and more complex. But we try and use a combination of different arrangements. So you can have, obviously, every individual has the ability to frame their own testament or their own will. That gives them complete freedom to enjoy that asset during their lifetime, and thereafter, obviously, leave clarity on how that asset has to be transferred to the next generation. But at this moment, we don't have that trouble in India, which is a vested duty. But there's always been murmurs. We keep hearing each year as, is that something which will come back? It used to be there at some point of time in the past, not at the moment. So one approach we sometimes take is of forming a trust. Again, we'll come to that maybe in the next slide. And the other aspect would be of shareholders agreements, particularly when companies tend to be the preferred mode of conducting business in India. Take the example that Haigreve gave of the Zandu and Imami situation. The Pariks and the Vaidyas would be seen as two distinct families, and perhaps a shareholders agreement would have been better served, better serving their interests to ensure that ownership remains within that closed group. One very important other aspect tends to be of ring fencing of assets, and this becomes relevant also in the context of the Indian economy. So, for instance, when you reach out for debt funding, banks and financial institutions in India tend to take a slightly more hardline approach on credit appraisal, what sort of security package they want. It is a function of the economic reality of the country, also a function of legal enforceability at times. So then, do you segregate business assets and family assets? How do you ring fence some key family assets, let's say a residential abode, etc.? How do you ensure that the ownership doesn't become exposed to third-party liabilities? So with all of this in mind, once the structure is available, implementing it is really a question of an ongoing time schedule. What I'd also like to emphasize is gradually, and we'll cover this in the later part of the presentation, business families, like businesses, are becoming international. They are no longer confined by borders. Yes, the happenings of the pandemic of the last 2 years explained to us how, yes, we're interdependent on other parts of the world, but need to be self-sufficient. But that doesn't in any way stop families from jumping borders and looking at newer business opportunities. So when we're looking at any kind of an ownership succession, we have to be very mindful of this element of, let's say, certain family members having moved jurisdictions and having become NRIs. If we move to the next slide, we'll discuss wills and trusts in a little bit more detail. While some or most of you may have heard of this, but just to summarize, these are the two fairly important aspects, particularly, let's say, when we're dealing with individuals. So some of the statistics that Haigreve read out at the beginning, they do indicate that a large part of family businesses still continue under sole ownership, and there isn't that much structuring that seems to have been done. Well, either a trust or a will seem to be the most obvious two structures that are used for ensuring good succession planning. So if there is a trust, as I indicated, well, it allows one to see the succession plan in play during their lifetime, provides a lot of satisfaction, and also helps ease out any implementation issues during their lifetime. What we've seen from a conflict resolution perspective is that people of the same generation tend to, at times, again, going back to the point of the moral compass and deference, pay heed to what the earlier generation speaks to. So if a trust is put in place and the governance mechanism follows and allows for smooth transition, if there are any bumps, then those are ironed out during that individual's lifetime. You can also have, because a trust is a fairly open vehicle, it gives you a tremendous amount of flexibility on dissecting each and every asset pool into, say, the ownership of the asset, or say the income or the usufruct that arises from that asset. You may want to give one to Mr. A and one to Mr. B. You may want to describe what happens in howsoever many scenarios. Let's say you are aware of a few happenings which will take place in your family or in your business. You can talk about all of those. There is a tremendous amount of flexibility also in terms of changing your mind. That, I must say, stays true even in a trust, even in a will, because the individual during his lifetime can change his will howsoever many times he sees fit, but that remains consistent even with the trust. What we do need to be mindful of is, going back to the cross-border scenario, depending on offshore trusts being set up, there may be disclosure requirements, whether in India or in that jurisdiction, but that is more a matter of compliance. And increasingly, those are things which are well understood, well documented, and can be addressed. Moving on to a will, again, it does provide a fair degree of control during a person's lifetime, simply because nothing happens during his or her lifetime under the will. Everything happens after that person passes away. And it's relatively simple to make. There's really no format per se. Yes, we would all have our own precedents on how we prefer to write it. But there are instances of people having written it on a simple piece of paper in their own handwriting, and that's as effective as a will under law. there's absolutely no reason for there to be further formality. We do, depending on your facts and circumstances, recommend additional precautions. For example, a registration, for example, you need a certain number of witnesses, etc. But all of that is more process than actual issues as such. You may need, depending on which state the assets lie in, you may need a probate. For example, Maharashtra, for example, Tamil Nadu, for example, West Bengal, they do insist that a will needs to be probated before it can be treated as valid. However, not having a will leaves behind far greater lack of clarity, because then if a will isn't left behind, then rules of intestate succession apply, in which situation assets may go beyond from the current individual to say other individuals where that individual had not seen it. As a simple example, a male Hindu who passes away without leaving a will, in his case, his mother, his wife, and his children would all be heirs. One would ordinarily think that he would want to first leave everything behind, say for their spouse or for their children to secure them, or maybe leave a defined set of assets behind for the mother, because obviously the mother looks to the son. But there could be other similar scenarios. So leaving a will not just ensures adequate settlement, but even from a pure process perspective, it's a far more simpler affair. You're leaving behind greater clarity for your heirs. We spoke about estate duty. India used to have estate duty sometime in the past. There are still several jurisdictions in the world that have estate duty, and therefore for people with cross-border assets, it's important to plan whether they have, say, separate wills for separate jurisdictions. Should there be one will which covers both? All of that planning can be easily done, provided it's thought through in advance. So we've spoken about succession, let's say in a slightly more binary scenario, let's say in a more nuclear family type scenario. But let's talk about, say, a situation where four brothers have been doing business together. If we move to the next slide, we've spoken about how we conceptualize succession planning in that stage. In such a scenario where, say, multiple families are involved or multiple individuals are involved, unfortunately, succession involves division. Because in more instances than not, we have seen that if multiple family members continue to remain involved not only in the ownership but also the management of the same business, it breeds discord, because there is scarce opportunity available for them to grow and to also satisfy their own aspirations, not just their economic requirements. So in the situation where there are larger families, we recommend evermore that to begin with, there should at least be a clear allocation of roles and responsibilities between different families, even if there isn't a division. Eventually, if there has to be a division, sometimes there are benefits of having an ultimate holding company. Sometimes not having an ultimate holding company can create issues, because the control of the business may appear fragmented. It may be split across multiple companies. If, of course, there is only one ultimate holding company, the division of that requires a greater degree of thought and restructuring, etc. From a Companies Act perspective or a tax law perspective. It requires a greater degree of risk appetite and a greater degree of planning. But having said that, the benefit of having the control consolidated in one place tends to reap a lot of benefits. We've seen a lot of clients also explore holding assets of such a nature in a family trust. As we discussed before, having a trust provides a lot of flexibility in terms of how the distribution takes place. It can provide a easier degree of control, say have a board of trustees, say have a group of trustees, also decide how the decision making will work. So over and above this, these are of course just the basic tenets of planning a division between multiple families. What we also realize at times, and increasingly in most family divisions of this nature, is coexistence after the division, or harmonious coexistence after the division, requires more careful thought as opposed to the division itself. So let's say there is a house brand which the business has been run under. Who will get the benefit of that going forward? Will everybody be able to partake, or will it be divided, say, basis certain business lines? Sometimes you will find that the broader business line of the entire family is the same. How do you then ensure that parties are not stepping on each other's toes? Could there be instances of, say, a non-compete that needs to be put in place? Could there be instances of, say, geographical boundaries that could be put in place? So just to give an example of that, if we flip to the next slide, we have a scenario where you could look at the glass as either half full or half empty. One approach is to see that, well, one of the sons did not get along with the balanced family, therefore he separated. It seems to have been done in an amicable manner because both of them are sitting side by side. But another perspective of it could be optically, is this looking good that the name doesn't seem to have been passed on in a proper and a well thought out manner. So it's a question of perspective really. One case study which we thought, if we flip to the next slide, which demonstrated a good amount of thought having gone into how to managing multi-generational incumbents, is Dollar Industries. So they are a textiles and apparels company, and obviously their product range and their product growth will have certain limitations given the nature of the business. So one question, as we understand, was raised was, what happens to the younger generation? How do you ensure that even between the younger generation and the older generation, the generation gap does not lead to conflict? So one thought process was, give the younger generation the ability to explore, say, e-commerce. And they made fantastic inroads. And if you look at the way e-commerce sales have really provided a fantastic fillip to the growth of Dollar Industries, it is for everybody to see. So again, if it requires a lot of innovation in thought and a lot of customized planning and solution oriented thinking. With that, perhaps we can move forward to one further good practice, which is on corporate governance. And sometimes, if we flip the next slide, Prakash, please. Sometimes we find that the reference of family businesses itself tends to indicate that are there really standards of governance that can be followed, because family businesses are meant to be run as more closely held companies. So if we look at what is really the importance of effective governance, the first and the most important criteria, and which should be the sole objective of any business, is long-term value creation. Because the best part of any business organization, whether a company or an LLP, under law we say that it has perpetual succession. It transcends the life of living beings. But is there really any merit to be had in that business continuing if it has not generated that kind of value, both in terms of monetary terms as well as perceptive and reputational terms, for it to sustain multiple generations of the same family? We believe that if governance is done effectively, it's actually a huge, intangible and invisible fillip to long-term value creation. And this comes with the acknowledgement that the priority of a family versus priorities of a business, they need to run in parallel track. They should not come in conflict at any stage. The moment they are coming in conflict, we go back to the same discussion, whether the same people who are owning the business are well suited to manage or not. The day we in fact tell clients that if you believe that your interests as a family are running contrary to the interests of the business as a whole, please then question your ability to manage the business and see whether you can bring on professional management. And what governance will allow you to do is you can borrow processes, put structures in place, put standard operating procedures in place, which balance not just the owners, not just the managers, but as Haigreve said, even the third level, your next generation of stakeholders, whether inside your business or outside your business, so your employees, your suppliers, your customers, and new partners that you are looking at, the environment, the entire ecosystem in which you function. Better governance leads to better outcomes for everybody put together. So then why is it challenging to implement corporate governance in family-run businesses? We've put down 3 thoughts on the next slide. The first thought is of information asymmetry, because it is always reasoned that somebody who's actually running the business and is involved in the business would have far greater information as compared to, say, the owners who are distant from the business, or let's say any third parties who don't have the same level of information. The next is board composition. And again, we're speaking more in a company's context. But should the board only have family members, or should the board have a neutral voice? Should the board have some external voices that you hear of and that help guide you down the right path? And the third and the most important aspect is, how do you dispel the perception of you being a family-owned business? And well, obviously, if the perception of being a family-owned business is that you are rock solid, stable, that you've withstood years and years of existence. Those are positives. But if you look at the two challenges that we spoke of, opacity and lack of inclusion, and more exclusiveness than inclusiveness, then that by itself creates a bit of a negative perception for family-owned businesses. So then how do we implement it, and what are our recommendations typically to clients? There are 5 things which we culled out of all of those lengthy memos that we deliver from time to time. The first and foremost is, again, going back to the distinction between ownership and management, it is very important to have clarity on which members of the family are you selecting and promoting to lead the business. And this needs to happen on a very, very robust meritocracy basis. Those individuals, not only should they have freedom and decision-making authority, but they also need to have clear accountability. As they say, with great power comes great responsibility. Both your mission statement, your family constitution, your charter documents, they need to see this entire principle through. The board of directors, to our mind, is critical, and having external parties in the board of directors brings a voice of reason at times. So let's say there are 2 family members and they have a differing view on how to progress the business or how to expand its reach. The core question that arises is, how do you settle that disagreement? It is not a dispute, it is a disagreement. It is a purely commercial matter. Sometimes having a third voice of reason on the same table is really helpful. At times, with family members, such conversations can be emotionally charged, because with family comes emotion, which you typically don't have when you're dealing with external stakeholders. The presence of a third party will make that conversation more civil, more professional, and which is essentially what you want for your business at the end of the day. We say we need to look at business and it is business at the end of the day is what we try and emphasize on. The question is, have we really seen that through, particularly from a governance basis? If we move to the next slide, the next question that arises is of transparency in business operations. So if we appreciate how the Companies Act functions on a very simplistic basis, there are certain annual disclosures which each company is required to make. More often than not, clients would like to see what is the least amount of disclosure we can make, because we don't want, for example, our competitors to know more about our business. Well, that's absolutely fair. But then are there other information points which you can identify from time to time, which you can dispel and ensure that you pass on, say, to your business partners, say to your suppliers and your customers? How do you promote greater faith, and how do you build greater credibility for yourselves as a business, as somebody who cares for the larger ecosystem? In this instance, what we've also found is that a lot of companies tend to establish a code of conduct and have it maybe as a charter or maybe as a vision statement on their website. But to what extent is it followed? Are you really auditing yourselves and your business partners whether they are actually following that code of conduct or not? As a part of our practice, on several occasions when we look at commercial contracts, we find, particularly in the Western world, they tend to have certain suppliers' codes of conduct which cover things like child labor, which cover things like environmental friendliness, etc. And they actually see it through from time to time. They audit their suppliers to see whether the suppliers are functioning on the same basis or not. One really needs to see whether a code of conduct is there more for lip service, or is it actually being implemented. Last but not the least, we do want to talk about diversity in management, and we feel that this is incredibly important. And again, if you see what we read about in the press, increasingly how there is a shift in terms of male primogeniture in all walks of life, whether it is our armed forces, whether it is say traditionally male-dominated professions, whether it is, and the boardroom is nothing different. There's no reason why we shouldn't be looking to find the best person for the job, and it is no longer about finding the best man for the job. And the more inclusive organizations are and the less exclusive they are, the more they will be perceived as being transparent and providing equality of opportunity. All of these 5 recommendations that we've given, none of those beyond a certain point would be required by law, say for a private company which is run by a family. But let's say if a family-run private company is able to walk the talk and go beyond the minimum requirements of the law, that is when they generate incredibly higher levels of goodwill and convince their stakeholders that they are there for long-term value creation. So with that, I'll request Haigreve to take the next couple of sections. If we can move to the next slide, please, Prakash.
So the next section, what I really wanted to deal with was the strategies for growth of a family business. So as we go down, the life cycle of a family business and a family business growing, what are some of the good practices and what are we really seeing as emerging trends as family business look at growth? I put this together just to illustrate that look, a family business is on the state street today, tomorrow wants to be the state itself. Yes, but it has to be very logical, well planned, well thought out, hedged against risk. Most family businesses have come down from generations, built very carefully, and one needs to sort of do very careful planning, not just to grow, but also to protect what one has built over generations. So what are some of the strategies we are seeing in growth of family businesses? One strategy we really see is one way to grow is to tap into new markets, expand the nature of business or activities. And when you have multiple family members or sub-families, then allocate responsibilities to different family members. So whether it's an overseas market or a certain product or a certain new line of business, and that's a great way to expand and also to have more involvement of family members. Another strategy for growth is really, for example, having younger family members to take up responsibilities where they are able to take on tasks which are more, they are more capable of doing. For example, e-commerce or something around digital, something around media and technology, social media, marketing and communication. So having younger people take some of these initiatives is again a great strategy for growth, avoiding conflicts and at the same time giving a lot of leadership and responsibilities within the family to different family members, and also means growth and expansion of the business. As some more thoughts, as we go and talk about growth, another way of growing would be, if you can move to the next slide, determining the highest source of revenue within the business and innovate on the same. So if you really see a certain product or you really see the line of business and say, okay, this is where we are best at, what we are best at, this is what we're doing well, how do we really grow here and involve different family members? So that's another way of growth. And last but not the least, involving professionals. The new trend is again where we separate ownership and management. And most families are not shying away to get leadership in family businesses as external professionals to make sure that the best talent is available for growth. That may be at the board level, that may be at non-executive level, it may be at day-to-day management level, it may be through independent directors, and these are all possibilities where families are adopting for growth of their business. Let's move on to growth through financing. When we talk about growth through financing, we're going to talk about different means, but it's very important for the family to determine the right mix between debt, equity, hybrid, and evaluate what are the risks and consequences in terms of the means of finance the family is adopting. So, of course, look at companies' cash flow and future projections. Look at the ownership to be retained, whether dilution is possible, not possible. Does the family want to dilute at all? What's the cost of finance? What's the security to be offered for the cost of finance? Are you offering only business assets? Are you offering your own personal assets, personal guarantees? How much of risk is the family prepared to take? Is the family pledging its entire business or holding? What is the existing capital structure? And dependent on capital structure and shareholding, how do you retain control? And of course, you have to determine the amount of capital required. And it has to be a step-by-step process. So it's really, on the one hand, growth, on the other hand, risk mitigation. And the both need to be really evaluated well before one really looks and goes down the growth path. We thought we'd talk a little bit about when a family business gets external investors. When a family actually is looking out to get external investors, what should be some of the criteria and important decision-making points for the family? First, to determine what capital is really required, because after all, the family will be diluting, will be giving part of the crown jewel away to a third party. So one has to be very cautious. At the same time, look, it's growth capital. In terms of why do you want an external investor? Do you want it only for the capital? Do you want also for bringing in good business practices? Again, family needs to have clarity. If it's good business practices, great. But then is the family really prepared for that level of transparency, joint decision making, or somebody else sitting in the boardroom together with the family and participating together with the family? So a lot of pluses in terms of good business practices, but also in terms of sharing control, ideology, and thoughts. The third reason why you might get, we can come back to the slide, is the same slide, is improved external perception. Yes, if a family business is growing, you get a third party investor, you get a private equity player, a leading name or a brand, or it improves perception internally within employees, externally, customers, suppliers, collaborators, people willing to provide new technologies, deal with the company. So I think all of that is great in terms of when you get an external investor. And of course, if you have a strategic investor, not just a financial investor, a strategic investor might bring in new technology, may open up new markets, may actually have a buyback arrangement. So one needs to think about all of these factors as a family business when you think about going out and getting external capital. What are some of the other very important issues when you go out and get external capital as a family business? What are the rights the family will be giving in terms of veto rights, rights in terms of decision making, business planning? What if there is a difference between the family or the existing people in management and the investor? How do you resolve that deadlock in terms of decision making? So, excuse me. So that's very important to think about when one goes out to get external investors. You don't want to be in a sort of a deadlock situation. It's much worse. You may remain small and beautiful rather than trying to grow, but then get caught in a deadlock and in a lockjaw. You don't know where to go. Very important to think upfront, have a common business plan, discuss with the investor, agree before embarking upon taking somebody else's capital. Another very important issue, when you're a family business, many a time you mix up business and personal assets in the same entity. You don't realize, but when you get an external investor, very important that you separate family assets out of your business. I remember one of my early cases where somebody was actually getting a private equity investor, and we were running through preparing the family, and we were called to the family house for a meeting, and we were sitting in the garden, and I just happened to ask that your beautiful house, when did you acquire it and what did you do? And the family said that, look, It's my house, but yes, it's in the company in which we are going to get an investment. And the first question I asked was that, look, if this is the house where you're staying and it belongs to the company where you're looking at getting an investment, then this house itself will be co-owned by your investor. And the family hadn't even thought about the fact that, look, now we need to separate the ownership of the house. Otherwise, even our core assets, family assets, will now be owned by the investor. Other points to think about: compensation. So if you are 100% owned, you don't bother whether you get dividends, you get a low salary, you get a high salary, whether you're getting ESOPs, you don't get ESOPs. But when you get an investor, again, you want to be compensated fairly. You have a divide between ownership and management, and you need to be compensated for management on an arm's length basis. You need to have your return as a shareholder, and again, something very important to think about. Another point, non-compete. As soon as you have an external investor, you will definitely have provisions where the investor will say, look, you can only do this line of business, or your entire time must be devoted to this line of business. You cannot do something outside of the business I'm investing in. Are you really prepared for that? Do you understand the consequences? And what happens if some family members want to go out and do something different? So who signs up to the non-compete? How many family members? What's the scope of the non-compete? What's the time horizon? All very important issues for the family to think about. And then I'd say most important is exit. So whenever you have investors or you go out to investors, they are coming for financial gain. And if they're coming for financial gain, they have an exit horizon, they invest, and they want to get out in 3 years, 5 years, 7 years with a certain return. Now, do you really as a family understand that that is really what is going to happen? And what will that mode of exit be? Will it be an IPO? Will it be a buyback by the company? Are you guaranteeing a certain return? Are you not guaranteeing? Will it be a management buyout? Or will you be forced to sell your entire company to a new owner or to a partner? What exit rights are you giving to the investor? Do they have flexibility to go and sell to just anybody, sell to a competitor who might then become your shareholder sitting next to you, or there'll be restrictions that they can't actually go out? So before you actually embark on an investment, look at why you're getting it and what is the exit you're offering, because this becomes the most important aspect, which you need to think about upfront and not at the time of exit, but upfront when you're getting the investment. Some further thoughts on growth. Sabi spoke about cross-border as we move to the next section, and growth beyond boundaries and borders. So when we talk about that, there are two sides to it. One is the regulatory side. Maybe we can turn to the next slide. The other part is, look, manpower, people, and as a family business, do you really have the capabilities to grow outside India? Do you want to move certain family members? Will you employ professionals? What will be the control? And there are many families have limited family members, many families have large family members, and it's convenient to actually have somebody outside India or in foreign markets. And then comes allocation of responsibilities, reporting, controls, and these are all areas to think about as a family thinks of expanding overseas. Then we can talk a little bit about the regulatory side. Of course, overseas investment by Indian businesses have been liberalized a lot over a period of time. Today, Indian entities such as companies, LLPs, partnership firms, and even individuals can invest outside India. For a corporate entity or a partnership, it's 400% of the net worth which one can invest. For individuals, up to $250,000 a year, one can invest. Mostly all sectors are under the automatic route, except certain sectors like real estate, banking, insurance, which are not under the automatic route. And the foreign business, of course, should be engaged in bona fide business abroad. So it's not just for the purposes of, say, treasury that one is investing abroad. That takes us to the liberalized remittance scheme. As I mentioned before, this was introduced in 2004 for permitting resident individuals to remit money outside India. And up to $250,000 a year can be invested outside India. This can be for any permissible current or capital account transaction. Also, many families have been using this to diversify their investments, and this need not be in a bona fide business abroad. This can also be opening a bank account and having portfolio investment abroad. So this is another area which we see families do. And the LRS can be used for purchasing property, can be used for portfolio investments. It can be for extending loans to NRI relatives. You can open a foreign bank account, and of course invest in businesses abroad. So a great tool available for diversification outside India. As we go along, family businesses, a lot of family businesses then look at going public. So in terms of expanding, of course, going public means accessing public money to promote growth as against, say, private money. Very important to do succession planning when you think of going public, because you then really need to separate management and ownership. As a public company, there can't be a mixture. That divide has to be there. Management is responsible to all stakeholders, not just to the family. You have to have transparency and efficiency in the operations. You have to think about, when we talk about transparency, related party transactions, you have to think about dealings with other businesses in the family. A public company must stand on its own. And if at all dealing with other family companies, has to be on an arm's length basis. Sometimes one goes public, a company goes public to give liquidity to investors. Again, very important that if there are multiple family shareholders in a public company, how do you really provide that control remains with the family? Liquidity shouldn't mean that any family member can go and sell out at any point in time. You need to put a shareholders agreement. You need to put up some lockups, some restrictions on sale to competitors within the family. Of course, an IPO in a listed company gives great credibility and visibility and reputation, which is great, could be great support to the business and recognition, helping the family to actually expand even further. A lot of corporate Indian businesses today, which are listed and very successful, you know better, started as very small family businesses, raised capital, and over a period of time have become very large publicly listed businesses. It gives great exposure in a very competitive, could be in a competitive market. And availability of further capital obviously becomes easy. You can do a follow-on offering, QIP, rights, raise new capital, and then keep raising more and more capital for expansion. So great avenue, but of course one has to tread with caution. When we look at listing, we have in India, of course, the main board of the stock exchanges, or we also have the SME platform, which again, not very widely used, but available. Main board obviously takes perseverance and time. It's a very long exercise, a lot of due diligence, prospectus, documents, and all the exchanges and SEBI have a very stringent eligibility criteria. There's great scrutiny in terms of the offer document, and the cost of compliance is also higher. When you look at the SME listing, then the access to capital is much easier. Of course, there's a restriction that the capital can't be more than 25 crores. There is, you don't need more than 50 investors. There's efficient risk distribution. You can facilitate growth through M&A because you have a listed paper which is marketable. You start getting into good governance because you have a regime which applies. So it's a good in-between, maybe between the main board and remaining private. And you can also incentivize employees, because if you incentivize them to ESOPs, there's liquidity available for them to actually be able to exercise and sell ESOPs. If you have investors or you have some family members who do not want to remain in the core business, it's a great way of giving liquidity for them to be able to exit. And obviously, any listing enhances the visibility and profile of the company and the business. So with that, we thought we'd end. This was some of our thoughts we shared, and we thought we'd leave some time for any questions.
Thank you so much, Haigreve and Samir. That was really insightful. We are opening this up for question answers, so I request you to just unmute your mic and go ahead and ask if there is.
Hi, Pratima. Mudit here, Mudit Jain.
Yeah.
So my question is, you talk about trust and all. Many people are forming trust to avoid giving, when they are giving personal guarantees, which now have become the norm for many companies after various scandals. Does the trust also come under the scrutiny of your assets? I mean, you may not mention it, but what is the law on that? Thank you.
No, very good question. And if you've created the trust at the right time, and those assets are not really assets which you have actually given to the banks or to the lenders as something belonging to you, or take the lender's consent and then settle the assets into a trust, then as far as the trust assets are concerned, they are actually legally owned by the trustees for the benefit of the beneficiaries. They are not owned.
No, my question was a little different, sir. You are giving a personal guarantee.
Right.
And they say what all wealth you're holding because of the assets. So then somehow he hived out into a trust, the ownership, but which may not be disclosed to the bankers. Then what is the question?
So if the trust is structured right, the trust has assets are not really owned by the individual who's giving the guarantee, because the trust, then assets are owned by the trustees for the benefit of the beneficiaries who are perhaps the larger family members. So you don't, if it is structured right, you don't really disclose the trust assets because they are not your individual property anymore.
And I guess the only other thing to add to that is sometimes bankers are becoming a little smarter. They're asking the guarantors to provide disclosures on their annual net worth and also maintain a certain level of net worth. So obviously all of the movement into the trust you'll have to have done prior to the guarantee. So just be a little careful on how the covenants are written.
And of course, a bank today is not going to accept a guarantee from a pauper, so one will have to see that, look, how much assets or what core assets you put in a trust, what remains in personal file, and draw a balance. So yes, to answer your question, you can structure where certain assets are put in a trust and are not within the purview, let's say, of the personal guarantee.
So, I have a question. A company for growth would inculcate professional directors, but the major difficulty in this family enterprises is evaluating, motivating, and monitoring professional directors' ability is not there in the family. And I'm a practicing chartered accountant. I've worked with closely held families. A major difficulty is the family doesn't have the ability to pick up professionals and then motivate them and monitor them. How do you overcome this?
A very, very good question. And this is really a sort of transition from a small family business to step by step to a larger business. So I think today, the biggest factor I see which is a deterrent for good professionals to come on board and join family businesses. Their confidence on transparency and good governance, because good professional directors are skeptical that, look, if a business is not run well, will I be saddled with liabilities? And as a director, I have onerous obligation. So one has to set a very good track record and set very good governance and transparency in a company and satisfy directors that, look, this is what we have and this is what we are going to follow. And I think then it will be much easier to attract professional directors, because I think professional directors and individuals are also looking for those opportunities. But I think the biggest deterrent is governance and liability.
Thank you, sir.
I have a question. As the professionals, as advisors, when you interact with families, and especially the businesses are closely held with a couple of successors or more successors, younger generation, what are the challenges you face as advisors? Of course, you are lawyers and you carry that expertise, or see you bring in that expertise, but still within the family, their interactions, their challenges, their dynamics, and you as advisors, professionals, what are the challenges that you face?
Oh, I think excellent question. And I think the biggest challenge we face is when there is a generational change and the new generation is coming into the business. To align vision, strategy between the two generations is the biggest challenge we face. The older generation sometimes wants to stick to certain principles. The younger generation wants to either grow very slow, and they want to be very conservative because they've seen that, look, this has been a very difficult business. We don't want to be so aggressive. We're happy with what we have. Why are we doing so much? On the other hand, sometimes the younger generation is far more aggressive and says, look, why are we not expanding? Why are we not doubling every second day? And they don't mind giving personal guarantees. They don't mind leveraging. They don't mind going abroad and expanding and taking much greater risks. So aligning vision and values between different generations, I think we see is the biggest gap and the biggest challenge. And I think once one addresses that, there is no perfect answer. But I guess with generational transition, one has to be prepared. And I think both have to be prepared for a compromise and a balance. And that's what good advisors can help strike that balance for family businesses.
I'll just add that sometimes it's very difficult to encourage everybody to speak and to convince everybody to listen. Because that open channel of communication between family members sometimes tends to suffer. So that's one of the things we must try and do in every situation.
Any more questions?
I have two questions.
Please go ahead.
Yeah. First things, thank you. For a company, this is like a real question which I have, which is related to my company. And the promoters, I mean, bootstrapped for like 25 years and invested quite a bit of their own personal capital over the period of time into the company. So that constitutes a part of the company's capital. But now we have, if we need to replace it with debt in the initial phase and withdraw the personal capital, how do we go about it?
No, different ways of doing it. One could actually introduce debt and do share buyback. And one has to see obviously tax efficiency, because there is a buyback tax. One has to look at it that way. Another way would be dividend distribution, and to get it in the form of a dividend. The third would be perhaps to look at taking the debt and putting it into a new business and investing, which may be more tax friendly. if in any way the capital is going to be used for a new business, maybe start a new business and then do a demerger. A demerger can be very tax efficient, where you can split the company and then separate the old business with the debt and the new business with the capital, and that can be very much tax free. So you could have the various ways depending on, look, what do you need the capital which you want back for? Do you need it for personal needs? Do you need it for family savings? You want to buy a house? Or you want it for a new business? You want to give it to the next generation? And depending on the needs, I think there are several ways in which you can structure it. Partly driving tax efficiency and partly looking at different structures for use.
Okay, thank you.
You had one more question.
Yes, the other question is like for company like ours, I mean, we are a little asset heavy compared to the overall, business volumes which we do. So, I mean, moving on, how to does it make sense to lighten the company by, exiting some assets, immovable assets, or is it better to keep the assets the way they are?
That's quite a loaded question, but it all depends on your business. If it's, for example, asset heavy, which is a real estate business, you might look at, okay, diversifying a little bit, selling off some assets is a good strategy. If it's an asset heavy business because it's very capex intensive business, then you can't get away with it, perhaps, because it's a very capex heavy business, and in which case what you can do is perhaps get third-party capital and share the investment load and get some family money out. So it'll depend on a lot of factors as to look. Without diluting, you can sell real estate and raise capital. The other is if it's capex heavy, you perhaps have to dilute. So it'll be a mix of future of the business, risk mitigation, use of capital. What do you want the redeemed capital for? Considering all of that, you could probably structure something.
Answers my questions. Thank you.
Are there any more questions? So, Haigreve, I have one question for you. And that is, you have, like he says, there are some traditional businesses which are asset heavy, and the new age businesses are all asset light, and the valuations are huge. Now, is there a way that you could use the best of both worlds, or the best of both business models that you could suggest?
Absolutely, and I think you raised something which perhaps is the most optimal way of doing business, because if you really look at the new age businesses, while they command a very high value, at some point in time, they also correct very fast. Whereas old age businesses have inherent value, far more stable in terms of value. So what are we really seeing? We're really seeing a combination of brick and mortar and new age combined together. Obviously, they have to be related, but if they are related businesses and they're combined together, perhaps that's the best story. So let's take, for example, a retail business. A retail business which has brick and mortar stores and a digital business, an e-commerce business, perhaps gets the best value as compared to just a brick and mortar retail business or just a digital business, or any manufacturing business today. Sales and marketing, communication, all of that you need a digital side and of the business. So can you have that only without the back end? You can, but then the risks are much greater. So a back end of a capital heavy, capex heavy business together with a front end, which is both brick and mortar and digital and new age, if you may call it, is probably the best combination. And when we talk about new age businesses, it's not just market facing, but new age businesses in terms of AI, in terms of processes, in terms of use of technology, 5G, efficiency, all of that, I think, combined with the broken brick and mortar business is perhaps the absolute leadership business one can create.
Yeah, thank you. Are there any more questions from anyone? Please unmute yourselves. Okay, so I don't think anyone has anything to ask. So, well, thank you so much, Haigreve and Samir. It's really been a wonderful time. We've had to understand different aspects of business, and I think the SME sector is going to benefit a lot from this conversation that we've had today. So we may call you up and ask you to do one more session, maybe in a few months if there are more questions that people have. So we would bother you yet another time. And thank you very much for being here today.
Great honor and pleasure.
Thank
We're
you.
Delighted. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you all the people who've participated in this. Do send in your questions if you have any, and we would get back to you. We would be in touch with the Khaitan and Company. So thank you, everyone, and have a good evening. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, Samir.
Thank you.
Thank you, Haigreve. Thank you.
Thank you, Prakash. Yeah.